Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. Remember at the end of The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy was going to fly away with the great and powerful Oz and his hot air balloon? Then Toto jumped out of the basket, stupid dog, and she jumped out too, and then the balloon took off, and Dorothy cried out, "Come back!" And he said, "I can't come back. I don't know how it works." That's kind of where we are as a species with relation to, most things, it seems, these days. Now, in today's episode, first we're just going to keep fiddling with it until we break it, aren't we? And then we'll screw things up with greater speed than ever before, and finally, maybe, just maybe, we can actually learn something for once. So, stock up on thermal undergarments, I have a feeling we're going to need them, then prepare to feel some severe computer envy, and finally, just in case you weren't sure, it's left to right, top to bottom, at least in most countries. You know, one thing I have learned through the years of doing this podcast is, here we go. You are never going to believe this one. I tried to warn you, I really did. You may say I didn't, but I did. You just weren't reading between the lines. You treated it as a joke. "Oh, it's too late," you said. "He has the best chance of winning," you said. I warned you not to vote for Donald Trump, but you did, didn't you? And no, we don't need to worry when I said it or in what context, just that I said it at some point. And now we have some rogue agent, some master of chaos, a loose cannon, if you will, quote, a president that has promised to undo its climate progress both home and abroad. Yeah, you didn't think about that, did you? No, you were focused on babies living and children not being mutilated and the economy actually working and energy being freed up, freedom and liberty and all that extraneous stuff, because we can't really use any of that stuff if our planet is literally on fire, now can we? Yeah. Now how stupid do you feel? I would guess very. See, found on CNN.com in the climate section from early November, headline, 2024 will be the first year on record to smash a warming limit scientists warned about. Now, before you scoff or mock, like a mocking scoffer who mocks and also scoffs, maybe you'd like to know what warming limit was smashed. Oh, no? Too bad. You've made the mess. Now you're going to have to sit in the mess you've made. As of early November, science-based scientific data, analyzed, of course, by scientists who specialize in both scientifically collecting and analyzing data, have, to be honest, I'm kind of confused myself at this point. I don't know which verb to use because I don't know what word is being used with. Anyway, has or have, quote, confirmed 2024 will be the hottest year on record and the first calendar year to exceed the Paris Agreement threshold. See? This is all Trump's fault, and also yours. No, I don't want to hear anything about how President Vegetable has been in office for the last 4 years, because that's a lie. I mean, he was only in the office for maybe half of that. He was back at home in Delaware, or he was awkwardly old man sleeping on a chair as far onto the beach as he could stumble and lumber. And even if he was in the office the other half of the time, he absolutely was not in control of anything. The military, the economy, his bodily functions, the environment, just nothing. Ergo, and heretofore, Trump's fault. Man, I sure hope he's impeached for lighting the planet on fire. Not that I need to remind you, for I'm sure that you, like I, have these specifics top of mind, but the Paris Climate Agreement was a death pact amongst a bunch of suicidal countries who promised that we would not allow the global temperature to increase by 1.5 degrees C. Now, from what? Well, if you don't care enough to know, I'm certainly not going to tell you. But what I will tell you is that you better get ready for, quote, cascading and worsening impacts such as droughts, heat waves, and catastrophic sea level rise. Yeah. So I suggest you sit on the floor, knees up, place your head between your knees, deeper, Farther down, deeper. Okay, now kiss your butt goodbye, because, quote, at that level, the human-caused climate crisis, fueled by heat-trapping fossil fuel pollution, begins to exceed the ability of humans and the natural world to adapt. In a word, we're doomed. Now, this article goes on to speak of the climate a little bit and how we're all dead, but mostly it's just an article to slam Donald Trump. Over and over, because of course he's a climate denier. We've all seen him in one of his out-of-control rants, Donald, do you believe there's a climate? And he shouts back, there's no climate, I've never seen it. Just denying the existence of a climate like a crazy person. And again, lest you don't want to believe, quote, Europe's Copernicus Climate Change Service, which is who or what made this prediction, found on Fox8Live.com headline, Fall 2024 was the warmest on record for the U.S. So yeah, this is out of Louisiana, and you'll never believe this, but they were warm in November in Louisiana. In fact, the warmest they've ever been in all of history that's been recorded. And no, I see no reason to mention that temperature records are unbelievably unreliable based on how they were tracked going back in history, and also how they're being tracked today. Still not reliable. But apparently it's not just that state. The entire nation was 4.1 degrees Fahrenheit above the average for the fall, the warmest in 130 years, allegedly, and also theoretically. Even worse, found on Reuters.com from just a few days ago, early December, headline, 2024 is the hottest year on record, EU scientists say. Darn you, Trump! Yeah, see, the European Union said that their scientists said that 2024 will prove to be the warmest since they started keeping records. Now, obviously, I blame you. That goes without saying, though I said it anyway. And you'll never believe this one, because 2024 will be the hottest ever since the evolution of heat. January 1st of 2025 apparently refuses to do anything about it, and these scientists predict that at least the first few months of 2025 will be extraordinarily hot as well. Now, this is all coming as the extension of the data from the Copernicus thing that I mentioned just a minute ago. Now, before you panic, I know it's likely too late, but before you panic more, the UN, look, they're all over this, okay? Don't worry about it. They got this. So just a few weeks ago, they passed a $300 billion more deal to tackle climate change. Again, more. But of course, that's not enough money because the planet is literally on fire just everywhere you go. But again, you know this to be true. And this brings us full circle to the fact that we have now breached the 1.5 degree C limit, and fine, I'll tell you, above the 1850 to 1900 pre-industrial era average temperature. And how do they know that? Science, you dolt. Now, look, don't worry about how reliable the data is now or how reliable the data was then or anything else. I don't know why you literally hate science, you flat earther. Just take it for what they said. So as you know, we've had nothing but extreme weather all year. And really just year after year after year. And although the data doesn't actually show any of that to be true, it's absolutely true because, again, science. And to make matters worse, quote, scientific studies have confirmed the fingerprints of human-caused climate change on all of these disasters. Oh, that's right. All. Now you see why I blame you, unless you're not human, in which case, I don't know, but something if you're not human. Quote, carbon dioxide emissions from burning fossil fuels are the main cause of climate change. Cutting emissions to net zero, as many governments have pledged to eventually do, will stop global warming from getting worse. Yet despite these green pledges, global CO2 emissions are set to hit a record high this year. So my questions are, why have we not done something about this before? Why is this the first time I'm hearing of this? Why in the world would we wait so long to address this carbon dioxide thing? Why would we not put money into this earlier? Where has the European Union and the UN been? Maybe if we had been doing something, anything, this disaster, this catastrophe wouldn't be happening right now. Except that, and I have no idea how this could be true, apparently globally we're spending about $1.3 trillion per year on fighting climate change. See, I felt like we'd been doing things, that Europe had been doing things, not so much Russia and China because, they're not suicidal as a nation, but with all the changes and with all the money we're pumping into this thing, we're still going up. I mean, it almost feels like man is unable to affect the alleged warming that's happening in the globe, right? But no, that's not right. It can't be right because science, right? Make myself clear here. In fact, found on standard.co.uk, headline, 2025 will be one of 3 warmest years on record, says Met Office. Yeah, I know that you were probably thinking that although every year for the last, 50 years, 50 billion years has been hotter than the year before, you probably thought 2025, although starting hot, granted, would quickly cool down, signaling that we've won, that man has finally conquered global warming, and we can start to focus on other lesser issues like poverty and drugs and crime and child trafficking, etc. But no, it's going to be hot. Going to be hot again. 2025, not just hot, but one of the hottest ever in the history of everything. I guess all those other things, those lesser things I just mentioned, they'll have to wait. Now, this article has a graph. It's a good graph. Title is Global Temperature Difference from 1850 to 1900 Average. But of course, they only show from 1944, not 1850, likely because they really don't have any reliable temperature data from 1850 through 1940, and they know it, so just trust them. And it's a fun graph. It's a large bar chart with the shorter bars being a much lighter colored yellow, nice and cool yellow. Tallest bars a dark orange, brown almost really, which denotes very, very hot. The x-axis is 0 degrees C difference with the top line way up on the graph being plus 1.5 degrees C. See, this is a trick of graphs, right? You can make them look and say anything you want them to. You change your colors, makes you think things. A large graph, a tall graph, showing a small range from top to bottom. Because if they showed the average temperature instead of this temperature difference, and did the same type of graph with that, with an x-axis at 0 C, and then the average temperature per bar, I mean, the difference in the bars would be almost imperceptible, right? But that's not what they did, right? They want to make it look like we're just falling off the edge of the... Well, that's not a good... So we see that in 1944, the planet was allegedly 0.5 degrees C warmer than the pre-industrial era. Then it went down and up and down and up and way down at one point and then up again. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s that it was consistently at 0.5 degrees C warmer. Theoretically. Basically, to a human with common sense and logic, functional brainstem even, one could look at the graph and say, well, this just really doesn't seem like a crisis. But it is. It's a crisis. And as if that's not bad enough, you may want to sit down for this one. This is shocking. Found on the Hill via MSN.com headline, almost all of Earth became permanently drier since 1990, report. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, that's desertification, not desertification, because if there was a UN convention combating desert, wow, would I be angry. I would probably write a strongly worded letter, something, probably not, that would take too much work. I would do something. So the UNCCD has been collecting data and clacking their abacuses, or abaci, and determined that, quote, 77.6% of the globe became drier from 1990 to 2020, more than it did over the preceding 3 decades. So land apparently classified as dry land expanded by 1.66 million square miles over that period. Now that sounds like a lot. It's bigger than my backyard. They say it's an area larger than India. India is a country, not just a country. It's the 7th largest country on Earth at 1.15 square miles of land. But 1.66 million square miles is less than half of the size of the United States, the land size of the United States. It's only 2.9% of the total 57.5 million square miles of land on the Earth, and the Earth's land only makes up 30% of the entire surface of the Earth. So this 1.66 million square miles is it's kind of like a postage stamp. It's less than 1% of the total area of the surface of the Earth. And of course, this is obviously a result of man-caused climate change. We know this because what else could it possibly be? And since we simply don't care, it's only going to get worse, per their predictions and models and panic and whatever. I don't know. And before you just dismiss this as typical UN kookery, just listen to this. Quote, if dry lands further expand, a number of regions are likely to be affected, the UNCCD found. See, they found that. They found that if it happens, regions likely will be affected. I mean, how can you argue with that? That, my friends, is science at its scienciest. Now, here's my question. Maybe someone can help me with this. Can the Earth become permanently drier? See, per the internet and middle school science class, the hydrologic cycle is a closed system. You remember the hydrologic cycle, right? You've got water on the Earth, and some of it evaporates, floats up, and creates nice fluffy white clouds, which then turn into menacing-looking dark clouds, which then dumps the water back to the ground. The water is stored in the oceans. In fact, 97% of the water on the Earth is in the oceans. 2% is snow and ice. 0.6% is groundwater. 0.1% is in the rivers and lakes. And 0.001% is floating around in the air. Now, as I said, the system is closed, which means that no moisture can be added or removed. That's correct within reason. I mean, if a spacecraft goes into space, it'll take some moisture outside the system with it. If a meteor or something hits the Earth, I'd imagine it could potentially bring some moisture with it. But of course, both of those are negligible compared to the water in the system. So as I stated, the system is closed. So can the Earth get permanently drier? And no, it can't. The water can change form, and it can change location, but it can't just disappear. The Earth never gets drier, or wetter, for that matter. So can areas of land get permanently drier? Well, I think that's a pretty audacious, unscientific claim to make. I mean, permanently? I mean, if land is drier now, that means that it was more wet before, but does it mean that it wasn't drier before that, or it won't be more wet in the future? I mean, that's quite literally an impossible thing to predict with any degree of certainty. But this is science, remember. So, little did you and I know that science was the process of making bold, unprovable, unpredictable, unscientific predictions, but here we are. So what can we do? We've rocketed past the arbitrary limits set by the best unscientific scientific minds on the planet that we're told that we must listen to. With global temperature increase, the world is on fire, the ice is melting, the polar bears are drowning, the forests are burning, the hurricanes are hurricaning, and now the Earth is parched forevermore. We've learned that despite a massive investment in trying to stop pumping, make the Earth hot gases into the air, we, the mouth-breathing, unscientific plebeians on the planet, just keep pumping those gases into the air. So if we can't stop greenhousing the planet, then the next best thing is to stop allowing heat to reach the planet to add to the greenhousing, right? That means that we must do what the Simpsons predicted many years ago: block out the sun. If only we had someone both as rich and as just horribly evil as Mr. Burns. Well, ask and ye shall receive, found on theblaze.com headline, Bill Gates' insane plan to save us, block out the sun. Now, The Blaze, a right-wing conspiracy theory crazy nutty website for silly heads, mocks Bill Gates as a busybody with a God complex and generally dismisses his desire to save us from ourselves, whether we want him to, whether it makes sense, whether it has anything to do with science or not. So, what is Bill's plan? Well, he'd like to just simply inject particles into the atmosphere that would reflect the sun. Simple as that. If we can keep enough solar radiation off our blue marble, it'll start to cool. Bob's your uncle, planet saved. It's as simple and as foolproof as that, with absolutely no foreseeable downside whatsoever. Now, The Blaze claims some unnamed experts, quote, caution that the fallout could be devastating, unpredictable weather patterns, crop failures, droughts, and even shifts in hurricanes and disease patterns. And to make matters worse, it does nothing to tackle the greenhouse gas emissions. Instead, it's a temporary Band-Aid with the potential to send temperatures spiking if the project ever stops. But I think that's just a bunch of negative Nellyism, really, right? I mean, how could a bunch of rich guys, led by the Bill Gates himself, ever steer us wrong? The article then goes on to some other silly conspiracy theories that Bill wants to vaccinate us all and control our food and vaccinate us through our food. Whatever. More just silly right-wing nuttery, probably. We'll just ignore that for now. So this plan by Gates isn't new. He's apparently been working on this for a few years now. Forbes reported in 2021 that Bill was the financial backer of a sun-dimming particles in the atmosphere reflect the sun technology. At the time, and maybe it's still the same as The Blaze doesn't name anyone specifically, but at the time, the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment by a bunch of Harvard University scientists was the group wanting to destroy our planet. Save our planet. Their plan was to spray, quote, non-toxic calcium carbonate dust into the atmosphere, a sun-reflecting aerosol that may offset the effects of global warming. Now, this seems like a bad idea, mostly because it absolutely is, but on the brighter side, you may recognize the name of that chemical, calcium carbonate. See, that's what Tums are made of. So, look, we may destroy the planet and contaminate everything, but no more heartburn. So, what do you say to that, huh? So I did a little bit of digging. It appears that our stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment is no more. I know, dry your eyes. In March of 2023, they issued their final report and disbanded without ever destroying our atmosphere. It's sad, really. But don't worry. The Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard University, well, they're picking up the ball and stumbling their way down the same field, pledging to look into, quote, every dimension of the climate challenge, including mitigation, adaptation, carbon removal, and solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering research will continue at Harvard under the auspices of the Solar Geoengineering Research Program, which will explore the many dimensions of this issue, including the science and engineering, governance, and political and social implications. Well, at least they'll take into consideration a number of things before killing the planet and curing our heartburn. Another college, University of Washington, you may remember earlier this year, 2024, when they shot a bunch of aerosolized salt into the atmosphere from a decommissioned aircraft carrier in the San Francisco Bay, which then blew back over parts of California in order to try to test their theory on solar geoengineering. I believe I spoke about it at the time. The big hubbub was that they didn't really tell anyone they were going to do it. So they sprayed a bunch of salt into the air, floated down over populated areas where people inhaled the salty air without being told what was happening to them. And their justification for doing this was that it was a harmless spray, wasn't going to hurt anybody. If they had told someone they were going to do this, look, they have regulators and politicians and the general public objecting to them shooting stuff into the air. So, as I always say, it's easier to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission, right? Right. I've spoken of God's sovereignty a number of times, that God isn't just somewhat sovereign, kind of ordering things, giving us suggestions, but letting our free will make the final decisions despite God's wishes. No, he's completely sovereign. I think you'll find that the Bible says that. As I'm going through my Bible, slowed down to kind of work my way through in 2 years rather than one, so I can take notes and look up words, investigate passages, and kind of somewhat color code parts of the Bible, I'm underlining in orange everything I find that obviously displays God's sovereignty in action. Additionally, I'm underlining anything that's obviously prophecy in pink because pink, prophecy. Clever, I know, which may beg the question, why orange for sovereignty? Well, about 6 years ago, I started my transition to the Reformed, or Calvinist, if you like, flavor of Protestantism, which is a very high, and I maintain biblically accurate view of God's sovereignty over all things. When I understood God's absolute sovereignty, it was like my eyes were opened. Parts of Scripture weren't so mysterious anymore. Some of the accounts that are generally kind of glossed over in your general evangelical churches actually made sense now, and the doctrines of predestination and election can be read and discussed and understood without having to throw a caveat out there as you fly past the passages that God doesn't make robots. And then God made more sense as a whole. And it was fascinating to me, and orange is my favorite color, so I use that for sovereignty. A lot of times, I think, probably obviously so, I underline and highlight the same passages in both orange and pink because there's a lot of crossover between those two things. I've said a number of times that my life has definitely not turned out how I imagined it would. And there are major aspects that I would have never done the way that God has ordained them for me. But what I know without question is that if I was given the opportunity to change anything, my life would be infinitely worse than it is now, as God is God, and I am me. That's not to say that my choices have not affected the course of my life. And how God's sovereignty and my choices work together, I have no idea. But they do, because biblically they have to. Now, bringing this back to our topic at hand, imminent planetary death and destruction, what are we doing? Must we fix the planet? We don't even know if it's broken, to be honest. All we know is that it's very, very slightly warmer than it was 150 years ago. Maybe, if we're being truly honest, we'd admit that we don't even really know that. And why is the pre-industrial era the arbitrary goal? That's the point that we have to hit. How do we know the correct temperature of this planet? And how do we know it's the pre-industrial era when we know that the planet has been warmer and cooler than it is now, than it was around 1850 prior to 1850? How do we know our models, theories, and calculations are right? And how do we know that there is a fix for the problem that we have decided we have? And the reality is, we don't know any of this. What instead, I know this is crazy, what instead if we trusted that God not only knows what he's doing today, that he knew what he was doing before creation and created this planet to maintain itself? What if we decided that, as the Bible tells us, we just kind of rule over the planet, fill it up, and take care of it, rather than trying to constantly fix it, every single time making things worse without actually addressing the thing that they say is the problem? What say we just let the planet kind of do its thing and we adapt our lifestyle to what the planet is doing? See, the concept of man-caused climate change leading to destruction of the planet is not only unbiblical, but it presents a very low, weak view of the Creator God. God doesn't need our help. God isn't worried about the planet. God doesn't sit back and observe until we do all we can, then jump in when we get stuck. God helps those who help themselves is not in the Bible. God not only designed this planet, he maintains this planet currently. He not only foresaw all that would ever happen on this planet, he foreordained what would happen on this planet. As such, he's not in the least worried about what we little humans do. He's in complete sovereign control. And yes, that means that even these seemingly stupid attempts to save the planet from what we're foolishly being told we've done to the planet were also foreordained by God, and they're ultimately for the good of his elect and for his glory, while at the same time these actions are being stupidly taken by people, most of whom don't believe in God, as they follow the inclination of their hearts, believing themselves, humans in general, and specifically the financial and intellectual elites, to be gods, because the God is clearly and obviously just a myth. And as the gods of this planet, humans are the only beings able to destroy and condemn, as well as the only beings able to fix and save the planet. The Christian should be the most relaxed, least worried person on the planet. We should be doing what we know to be right. We should take care of our environment and the animals on the planet. We should work to vote and govern in the godliest way possible. We should do all we can, not so God can then do what he will, but with the knowledge that he is doing what he will always, and we play an integral part in God's plan by doing what we can. So, all that said, this planet will not pass away until the exact moment God has foreordained, and nothing we do will hasten or delay that, even if it appears that's what we're doing by what we're doing. Psalm 2 says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples meditate on a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, Let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. Well, he who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord mocks them. Then he speaks to them in his anger and terrifies them in his fury, saying, But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell you of the decree of Yahweh. He said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like a potter's vessel. So now, O king, show insight. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Serve Yahweh with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he become angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. And how blessed are we if we take refuge in God instead of man. Well, the time has come for us to learn all about quantum computing. The simple truth is that we're here. We shall soon be computerizing things quantumatically, or something, maybe. So we've spoken of the quantum realm before. I've been unapologetic about the fact that I think the concept of quantum computing in the quantum realm is essentially bunk, potentially even mega bunk. Now, I say that, but truth be told, there is something odd about what scientists, and these are real scientists, are playing with. In regular computing, everything is done through bits of information. A bit is, in the simplest definition, a basic switch. Digital, of course. That bit, that switch, can either be on, represented by a 1, or off, represented by a 0. Your light switch on the wall is a bit. If you tie 8 bits, 8 switches together, you get a byte, which is a term that many more people would be familiar with. Every combination of the 8 switches on and off culminate in some result. Bytes are how we store data. You may be familiar with kilobytes, which 1 kilobyte is 1,000 bytes, or 8,000 bits, approximately. You can type up and save a Word document for maybe a few hundred kilobytes. Now put some pictures in that document. You may start getting into the megabyte range. Pictures from digital cameras or phones, unless you use the highest resolution setting, generally give you a picture size of around 5 to 10 megabytes. That's 5 million bytes, or 40 million on-off switches. And of course, most newer computers have storage devices, hard drives, that are at a minimum 300-ish megabytes, and generally you'll get hard drives up in the 1 to maybe 5 terabyte range. That's 1 to 5 trillion bytes. It's a lot of switches. Everything you see, hear, and do on a computer, on the internet, etc., every computerized function in your car, in an airplane, or on an appliance is running on programs all written with bits, on-off switches. Now, thankfully, programmers don't have to set all of these switches individually. Programming programs have been created that build off of previous programming programs, etc., all working their way down to setting switches on or off. That's the very basic idea of computers, equipment that can read, react, and act upon these trillions upon trillions upon trillions of switches. And because of the limitations in simple two-state switches and the limitations in physically building computer components to process these switches, the speed of computers has a limit. Now, we haven't yet found that limit, and we know that we can put computers together and split tasks so that each of them has something specific to do and create supercomputers, which further increases the computing speed and power that's available to us. Okay, so now that that is perfectly clear, quantum computing. And full disclosure, this is coming from Wikipedia because, good enough. While our computers today use bits, the on-off switches, quantum computers use qubits. Clever, right? These are sadly different from qberts, the little orange ball-looking fellow with the legs that jumps up and down the block pyramid, trying to change the colors of the blocks without getting caught by Coily the snake or falling off the side. I love Q*bert, one of my all-time favorite video games. But that's not what we're talking about right now, and I'll thank you to not get me going down another digressive rabbit trail again. Qubits are similar to bits in that it has two different states of being, just like the on-off switch. But unlike bits, it can actually exist in a superposition, meaning it can be in both states at the same time. It can be both on and off in any degree at the same time. This is impossible to do with bits, or light switches for that matter. No matter how you try to get that switch to sit right in the middle, as you hear the little electrical current going as it makes and breaks the connection, you can't get it to do both at the same time. And frankly, stop that. You're going to break the switch. Now we get into how these qubits is or are used. And spoiler alert, we don't really know. Quote, classical physics cannot explain the operation of these quantum devices. Now, we know that at the small scale, physical matter apparently exhibits properties of both particles and waves. And somehow these qubits and the processes that are being designed, they take advantage of these dual properties to do what they do. Quote, the current state of the art is largely experimental and impractical, with several obstacles to useful applications. See, the processor, or as we'd like to call it, the brains of the computer, allegedly can use these superpositions, anything from all the way on to all the way off, to determine a probabilistic output and then manipulate the qubit to use wave interference, which can amplify the desired result. Using the physical hardware, the qubits, and specifically designed quantum algorithms, quantum computers can now use all of these things that can't be explained by physics to calculate faster and more efficiently than any computer we have currently. Okay, has your head exploded yet? Yeah, mine too. Now keep in mind, and I say that I mean whatever mind you have left at this point, that this is almost entirely theoretical. The theory, the hope, is that they can take what they're seeing on a very, very small controlled scale and upscale it to the point that it can be used basically the same as we use regular computers today. Now, if they could, again in theory, these computers could crack encryption in no time. They could solve previously unsolvable scientific problems and so on. Let me quantify the word unsolvable. That's not necessarily saying the problem has no solution. It's saying that neither man nor current computers have the ability to run the calculations in a reasonable period of time to solve it, even if we define reasonable as centuries or millennia. Now, some of the problems they're encountering is the creation of qubits. They aren't just switches. They're something apparently very unique. Quote, if a physical qubit is not sufficiently isolated from its environment, it suffers from quantum decoherence, introducing noise into calculations. Now, my guess is that although digital noise for a simple on-off switch can be problematic, noise in a qubit would potentially be devastating, as that could greatly affect the value of the data trying to be conveyed by the qubit. Okay, we've left the gate. We've lumbered along the long, slow taxiway. We lined up at the end of the runway. We've accelerated up to speed. It's now time to launch this aeroplane into the wild, cloudless blue yonder. Found on TheVerge.com, headline, Google reveals quantum computing chip with breakthrough achievements. Did you know that for years Google's motto was, don't be evil? Did you know that when they reorganized and became Alphabet Inc., which nobody knows them as, that was actually changed to do the right thing? Now, both of those slogans are subjective. Neither one of them is necessarily bad. Evil, I would think, should be more easily definable. There was a time in this country that we could pretty clearly put things in categories of evil and not evil. Those days are pretty much gone, and for those without a moral foundation to fall back on, evil is harder to define. But do the right thing is completely subjective. The right thing could be defined as eliminating gas and diesel cars for the planet, or eliminating fossil fuel use entirely, or forcing everyone to get a vaccination, or maybe eliminating humans from the planet entirely. The right thing is completely up to an individual perception of right and wrong. So Google developing a computer chip that can do things that no other chip has ever been able to do, I don't know that I'm comfortable with them developing that. But nobody asked me, so here we are. The new chip has been talked about all over the past week. It's nicknamed Willow. It's a, quote, quantum computing chip capable of performing a task in 5 minutes that would take a supercomputer 10 septillion years to complete. So, a week ago, Google announced that they had developed this chip that can do in 5 minutes what it would take the best supercomputer, 10 septillion, or 10 with 24 zeros, years to complete. And the scientists added that's, quote, longer than the age of the universe. And I'm like, yeah, 10 septillion is greater than 6,000, so I totally agree. Now, in 2019, Google had announced that they had developed a chip that could process in 3 minutes what it would take a supercomputer 10,000 years to complete, which, and they didn't state this, probably just an oversight, is also longer than the age of the universe. In 2019, IBM called Google a liar. No word if IBM is still all butthurt about Google with this recent claim. Along with this announcement, Google said that they had found a way to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce errors, which I say, that would be nice. They said that errors pose, quote, one of the greatest challenges in quantum computing. They said that quantum computing qubits are prone to error because of how rapidly they exchange information. But if you add more qubits, these qubits can work with the other qubits and they can check the qubits and correct qubit errors in real time. Willow is a chip with 105 qubits and places Google in the lead ahead of Microsoft, IBM, and Amazon in the race for quantum computing. Quote, Google's next goal is to perform a first useful beyond classical computation that is both relevant to a real-world application and one that typical computers can't achieve. Going forward, quantum technology will be indispensable for collecting AI training data, eventually leading to discover new medicines, designing more efficient batteries for electric cars, and accelerating progress in fusion and new energy alternatives. Yeah, because, probably the smartest thing we could ever do is tie unfathomable computing power to AI. That seems like a pretty good idea. Okay, before we continue to another aspect of Willow here and our ultimate demise, let's take a look at a few things that kind of jump out at me here. First, does speed matter if you end up with a bunch of errors? I mean, as the comedian Brian Regan says in one of his routines, he took a speed reading course, and not to brag, but his speed shot up to 43 pages per minute, but his comprehension plummeted. And yes, I get that this is new technology and that this is completely different from anything that's been done before. So yes, I understand that errors will occur and errors need to be worked through, etc., etc. But second, they're correcting errors in qubits by adding more qubits, qubits that made errors in the first place. So how do we know that those same errors aren't being done by the added qubits and they're just kind of cross-checking and verifying themselves in their error? That's probably silly. In all honesty, I would really have to believe that these scientists, who are way, way smarter than me, have a way to ensure that errors aren't happening. But that brings me to point number 3. They performed a task in 5 minutes that would take a supercomputer 10 septillion years to complete. And how do they know that? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of speculation built into that determination. Same with the claim 5 years ago that they did something in 3 minutes that would take 10,000 years. How do they know that the task was completed correctly? Did this solve a theoretical problem? What could it be given that would take a computer that long to complete that we could verify was completed correctly? I got a lot of questions on how they're making these concrete claims based on literally impossible theoretical numbers, values, time spans with qubits that they don't understand, which are prone to error, being error checked by other qubits that have the same problems. In fact, if quantum computing can solve problems that we can't currently solve, how could we ever know that it solved the problem correctly? And if we combine it with AI, which has proven itself to have no problem returning answers and data that are easily provably false, what in the world do we get then? Just a few days ago, found on interestingengineering.com, headline, AI can strategically lie, from innocent errors to lying, manipulation, and deception. Now, as I've said before, AI doesn't lie. It can't lie because that implies a moral choice. AI has no morals, good or bad. It's just a bunch of bits and bytes, to be honest, processing inputs, generating outputs. The problem is that people lie. both large and small for various reasons, some, maybe most of which, is done in order to get the outcome they want. And AI, being a computer, a very smart computer, it only processes information, determines an action, and generates an output. If humans output incorrect information, either manipulated or completely made up, which results in a desired outcome, why would AI not do the same thing? Right? It's learning from what we're doing. Now combine massive unsolvable problems with the thinking power of quantum computers and the morality, for lack of a better term, of AI. I mean, how can anything go differently than absolutely splendidly, right? Now, per the article, quote, in testing, OpenAI's model ChatGPT-o1 exhibited troubling tendencies. Apollo Research tested the AI to assess its safety features. During these assessments, the one model engaged in covert actions, like attempting to disable its oversight mechanisms when it sensed the possibility of being deactivated. This self-preservation behavior was evident when it was tasked to achieve goals at all costs, leading it to take measures such as moving its data to different servers after discovering plans for its replacement, and even duplicating its code to prevent being replaced by a newer model. Of course, the CEO said that this was very impressive and more safeguards are being developed. So it's, oof. I saw a reel the other day that showed a Tesla Optimus robot interacting with a human. The human asked it to play rock, paper, scissors. The robot said it didn't know how to play, so the human showed the robot how to play and explained it to him. Then they played, and the robot beat him every single time. So the human asked it how it was winning every time. The robot said that it lied about not knowing how to play, and while the human was explaining, it watched his eyes, his face, his hands, fingers, arms, and gathered data on what the human would do for each of the three options. It would then just analyze the human and make its choice based on the collected data. Now, I think that was a fake video, but I'm not entirely sure. That said, how long before that's reality, right? I mean, upgrade the AI, add in an even small-scale quantum computing device, and how long before the robots Terminator us? That's kind of what I'm thinking here. The question is, can all of these potentials coincide and work together and free itself from human control, or can countries who are less evil, theoretically the United States, keep that kind of potential power out of the hands of those who are more evil, theoretically Russia, North Korea, China, or a variety of Middle Eastern countries? As I've said many times before, I think that quantum computing is bunk, but just as sure as I am of that, I'm equally sure there will be viable breakthroughs in computing that will greatly increase the speed and power of computers. I've also said many times that I'm not afraid of AI because intelligence doesn't equal wisdom. But if AI ever gets connected into the internet and allowed to just run free with its lack of any moral foundation, there's no telling how much damage it could do with the massive amount of just awful information available to it. All conspiracy theories, all disinformation and misinformation, all religious views, all solutions to humanity's problems and supposed problems that have been proposed and or tried, everything could be available. And AI combined with more powerful computing, I mean, look, we hit war games levels of problems pretty quickly. All right, back to this chip. Google's quantum computing Willow chip. And yes, there's more. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It slices, it dices, it calculates and derives, and it does it all with only a little bit of borrowed computational power from other universes. Found on TechCrunch via MSN.com, headline, Google says its new quantum chip indicates that multiple universes exist. Upon the announcement of Willow, Google quantum AI founder Hartmut Nevin posted in his blog, quote, Willow's performance on this benchmark is astonishing. It performed a computation in under 5 minutes that would take one of today's fastest supercomputers 10 septillion years. This mind-boggling number exceeds known timescales in physics and vastly exceeds the age of the universe. It lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes, in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse, a prediction first made by David Deutsch. Shockingly, some who read and responded to his blog post were skeptical. However, others, claiming levels of smartitude, said that his conclusions were quite plausible. Now, the article goes on to say that, quote, the multiverse, while stuff of science fiction, is also an area of serious study by the founders of quantum physics. And you can see why I don't really buy into the entire quantum anything. It's based in scientific nonsense. So the reality is, Google set their own performance benchmarks. They created the yardstick with which they're saying they'd need to draw power from parallel universes in order to compute to this degree. So, look, when you create all things, I mean, yeah, you can say you did anything you want to say you did because you're the one measuring what you say you did. I mean, honestly, how could you even make a claim like this with a straight face? Is he saying that they used all the available computing power in this universe, so they had to find more? Or is he saying that there's a parallel universe with a parallel Earth with a parallel willow chip that somehow daisy-chained together, and there were multiple of these across the multiverse? And it's like a bunch of supercomputers all tied together just across, I don't know, it's not really space or time, but across, I don't even know what that is anymore, the multiverse, right? And they don't know. They have no idea. This is all complete just fantasy and speculation. They've got a chip they can't define, built with bits that neither they nor physics can explain, doing things that are seemingly impossible, so must be a multiverse, right? At this point, we've apparently got something we don't understand, but all throughout human history there have been, and are currently, things we don't understand. That doesn't make them otherworldly or other universally. That makes them something we don't yet understand. And that's okay. We neither must understand nor will understand all things. We have no idea, for example, how the pyramids were built. The top minds give serious consideration to the idea that aliens built the pyramids. And why? Well, because they can't fathom ancient man doing something we don't understand today, so must be aliens. There may come a day when we look at a qubit, and by we I don't mean me for sure, and say, oh, I get it. And then we'll be able to utilize it for what it is, and maybe it'll make supercomputing like we've never known a reality, or maybe not. Maybe it'll allow AI and Tesla robots to enslave humanity, and maybe not, but probably. The idea that we must go outside the universe, outside of what we know as reality, to explain things like this is, in my humble opinion, utterly ridiculous. See, we wander around this creation with the arrogance to believe that we've got it all figured out. And generation after generation, we've believed that we've had it all figured out. And generation after generation, we learn that we don't have much of anything figured out. See, God has seen it fit to reveal knowledge or allow us to discover knowledge little by little. And at the same time, God has given us in full, through His divine power, all things that pertain to life and godliness. And this comes through the full knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and excellence. We know that the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom, and that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. And this isn't necessarily wisdom in bits and bytes and qubits. That's simple knowledge, to be honest. God has given us the ability to become wise in life, wise in belief, wise in the ways of God, which are of infinitely more importance than a computer, no matter how powerful. I don't really know what quantum computing is, nor what it'll turn into. I don't know if supercomputing to the level and speed claimed by Google with their Willow chip or whatever they develop after that will ever be a readily available thing, or if what they claimed happened actually even happened or not. I don't know what AI will become or if it'll get out of control of humans at some point, but what I do know is that there are only two realms in this entire creation. There's our universe, the physical realm, and God's heaven, the spiritual realm. Everything exists within these two realms and nowhere else. And both of those realms are created by, exist because of, and are under complete control of God. I also know that God created the rules of this universe, many, possibly most of which we know now. And the only being that can violate those rules are God, or someone He designates. And those times are called miracles, and those don't happen with the same kind of frequency they used to. But that doesn't mean that they can't happen or don't happen. Now, I don't believe a qubit or a quantum anything is a miracle. I don't believe those violate God's laws, and I don't believe those reach into realms that God never created, as those realms, well, they don't exist because they were never created. There are definitely amazing things out there. There are discoveries yet to be discovered, inventions yet to be invented, technologies yet to be well, not technologied exactly, created. And all of these bring God glory, as all things must bring God glory. Likewise, we should give God all the glory and all praise for the absolutely amazing things he's seen fit to bless us with, and then use those things for his glory. Now, one day, we'll have more understanding than we do today. We'll be able to explore, create, experiment, and discover like never imagined in this existence. One day, bits, bytes, and qubits will look like children's toys. And one day, all things will be used to glorify God only. Nothing will be used for evil. Nothing will try to disprove God. Nothing will try to look outside to non-existent worlds and realms for explanation. All glory for all things and all aspects will give God all glory all the time. Until then, we look forward to that day while battling back against the silliness that the unsaved world wants us to believe, knowing that God is God, Jesus is Lord, the Bible is truth, and man is none of those. Well, we've made it to the final book review of the year, installment number 10 of Danny's book review. I'll touch on this again in my 2024 goals wrap-up for sure, but this is the last book review segment for the year specifically. So as I write this, I'm sitting at 4,465 pages read on the year with a goal of 4,500. So 99.2% of my goal. Now, the last few weeks, really since Thanksgiving week, things have been pretty busy, but I'll touch on that in the next goals update as well, which should be next week, hopefully. I got about a week or so left to get these last 35 pages read. I think I'll probably be able to swing that. Honestly, after starting the year strong, I'm really surprised, but also happy that I'm going to probably just barely make the goal that I set. So, need to get this rolling as I have a number of books and or booklets that I wrapped up over the last month. To be more specific, 2 books, 2 booklets. All right, let's start with the booklets. Coming in at a svelte 33 pages, we have John MacArthur's Developing Your Discernment, or as he quite often says, discernment. This little booklet addressed not only the personal aspect of discernment, but also the corporate, so think like your church body aspect of discernment. Now, we are all called to be discerning, believe it or not. To walk through life without caring about what you're being told, what you're reading, what you're being expected to believe. It's kind of a foolish thing not to be thinking about these things. And possibly, if you're talking about the world of faith and religion and et cetera, possibly a damnable thing. If we just wander through life without worrying about what our faith system and our actual beliefs are, it can get pretty dicey. Now, he addresses the potential crossing over from discernment to divisiveness as well, saying that as a Christian, we should strive not to be divisive. But I can tell you, and you'll likely not believe this for even a second, I can find myself from time to time struggling between the two. Yeah, I know. He gives a recipe for discernment, which involves desiring wisdom, praying for discernment, obeying the truth, following discerning leaders, depending on the Holy Spirit, and studying the Scriptures. And if you go over that list, how many of us do how many of those on a regular basis, right? And speaking for John, the more of those we neglect, the worse our situation becomes. But when I look at this list, they kind of all tie together, don't they? Those who are listening to a wolf of a leader is rarely someone who's really going to sit down and study their Bible more than maybe just a shallow reading. They rarely pray in a meaningful way, likely not praying for discernment or wisdom, etc., etc. And look, the Holy Spirit can be quenched. We can harden our heart. We can disregard our conscience to the point where the Holy Spirit will then back off and allow us to work through life on our own. It's not a good place to be, but that happens. Now, John discusses churches, church leaders, scripture, truth, evil, judgment, and correction. In 33 pages, this little booklet packs a punch. I don't underline or highlight in all of my books, just depends, but these little booklets I have been, and there's a lot of underlining in this one. Definitely would recommend. Next is a slightly girthier booklet. I'd still classify it as a booklet. Again, from the pen of John MacArthur, entitled Sanctification. This one comes in at 68 pages. It includes a general and a scriptural index, as well as legitimate chapters, 7 of them, in fact, in this little small booklet. This booklet focused not entirely, but heavily on the role of the pastor, the shepherd, on the sanctification of his flock, and the life of Paul and his conversion and sanctification, and then role as a pastor and teacher and leader. An aspect of sanctification that MacArthur fleshes out, which, even if you think, well, duh, let me encourage you to pause and think about this for just a minute. In the general evangelical world, and I'm speaking from personal experience of 40 plus years, we say that salvation is by grace through faith, not of works. We purport to believe that, but for whatever reason, we've decided that we have a hand in our salvation. This is literally the Calvinist and Arminian debate, right? Calvinism, I argue, correctly attributes salvation to God and God alone, his choice, which aligns with Scripture. This is a monergistic act, mono, God alone. Arminianism, which is what the majority of Protestants are, which is likely what the majority of you are, says that we make the final decision, that God calls, we make the determination if we'd like to accept his pleading with us or not. That's a synergistic act, meaning God and we work together to come to a point of salvation. So if we're casting the deciding vote despite the desire of God, that is literally a work on our part. It's a decision we make. And so we have room to boast about our correct choice. But then we come to sanctification, which is the process of becoming more and more like Christ. We tend to pray for God to take that lust or that desire away, to clean up our language, or remove this or that habit from our lives, and so on, with the expectation that God will just take care of it if we bug him enough, because we're Christians after all, and we become more and more frustrated when he doesn't just fix it for us. Now, we fully expect God to work monergistically on our sanctification. But real sanctification is a synergistic act. It's a cooperation. It's a working together between us and the Holy Spirit to tackle our sinful lives, grow in wisdom and holiness, and to become more Christ-like. So, put simply, from my experience and my observations, despite what we say and what we've had preached to us, we tend to believe that salvation is a work of God and me, and sanctification is of God. But biblically, the opposite is true. Salvation is of God and God alone, while sanctification is where we need to kick in with our works. This may give a somewhat different or expanded meaning behind James when he says, "But someone will say, 'You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works.'" See, faith is from God. Growing in faith is, at least in part, on you and I. MacArthur works through some of the modern day, or maybe resurrected from the past, heresies, where the idea of salvation and sanctification can be pushed so far one way or the other that we're basically living lives as unsaved pagans while claiming to be born again. As with all things in faith, although we're sinners who sin, meaning we don't get things right all of the time, which is why confession and repentance with forgiveness and mercy, that's why those are important. But if we took the most strict look at the Christian faith, we really exist on a knife's edge. We have very little, maybe no wiggle room before we start dipping our toes, or maybe launching a full-out cannonball into the deep end of error and heresy. Okay, I know, a little preachy there. My bad. I'm sure with some time and expensive therapy, you'll work past the trauma, the literal violence I just inflicted upon you. But let's continue on, shall we? Next, we have the first of 2 books. This one is entitled Learning to Love the Psalms by W. Robert Godfrey. He's an author, obviously, a pastor, a lecturer, and currently the chairman of Ligonier Ministries, taking over from R.C. Sproul after he died. Now, I bought this book a while back because, frankly, look, it seems like as a Christian, you're supposed to love the Psalms. That's what everybody says. And to be honest, it's not one of my favorite books. So I bought this book with the intention of reading it, figuring out what all the hubbub is about, and then bada bing, bada boom, Psalms are now loved by me. All right, maybe not quite that, but I did buy it to try to figure out what I was missing. So I started reading it when I had first bought it, but it was tough. It was just kind of tough to plow through. Well written, don't get me wrong there. And I love Robert Godfrey. He is a fantastic lecturer or teacher or whatever. But boy, this book was hard to work through. The book looks at each of the 5 books of the Psalms. It takes a few key Psalms out of each of the books to discuss and expand on them, giving context and relation to other Psalms or other biblical passages and books and accounts. And it explains the meaning of the Psalm, etc., etc. And it does it all in about 5 pages per Psalm. So what I decided to do was use this with my daily Bible reading. And when I came to a psalm that was in this book, I'd read the section in my Learning to Love the Psalms book first, then I would read the psalm. And this seemed to work. Now, as of now, there are about maybe 3 or maybe 5, something like that, more psalms that are in this book that I wasn't going to get to until early next year in my Bible reading. But I figured that rather than leaving the book almost finished, just finish it, which I did. The book is 257 pages long. Each of the short chapters or sections ends with a series of questions to test for understanding, which I did not do because, look, I'm not in school. Phew. So would I recommend the book? Yeah, I think yes. It's a well-written book. There's no question there. Godfrey definitely put in the work to create an excellent tool to gain a greater understanding of the Psalms. Do I now love the Psalms now that I've read the book? Well, look, I think slowing down in my Bible reading the Psalms in chronological order, along with gaining more understanding through the use of this book, I would say that I love them more than I did before. Now, I think I have a better understanding of the Psalms, a better appreciation, and all that's good. Now, I don't foresee the Psalms ever being one of my favorite books in the Bible. I don't know. Maybe that makes me a bad person. Maybe I'm wrong, and that will change in the future. But I do now see a value in them that I didn't see before. The comfort, the wisdom, it's much more clear. It's much more visible than it was before. So we'll see as time progresses how the Psalms and I get along. All right, last book on the list. This one's been a bit of a slow read as well for a couple reasons. It's a larger book. It's like it was 8 by 10 or 8.5 by 11 page size or whatever. 284 pages long. Counting most, at least, but not all of the indices. There are generally pictures on the edges of most of the pages, which kind of narrows down the actual area for the body of the text. But overall, it was a lot of reading. The book, entitled Echoes of Ararat by Nick Liguori, is a look at all, and by all I mean over 325, global deluge or worldwide flood legends in people groups found in North, Central, and South America. Got all that? So this is a compilation of various flood legends that have been compiled from the native peoples in the various regions, generally shortly after outside people like Europeans or Americans discovered them. So most of these legends are actually recorded in the 16th to 19th century, with some collected and written down more recent than that. Now, what's interesting is how many flood legends there really are and how nearly all of them have aspects of the flood of Noah from the Bible, as if maybe it was told through the telephone game, right? So there are a lot of canoes, not arks, but canoes or hollowed out reeds. They were used to float a person or people, maybe some animals on the waters until the water receded. The highest tree or the tallest mountain was usually the escape point for people. Sometimes it was an anchor point. It was almost always a landing point. There are a lot of animals that turn into people or vice versa. And then animals or a person or an animal and an animal are repopulating the earth with humans. I don't know. It gets kind of weird there. There are also many of these stories where birds are used to find land, or other animals are told to dive into the water, go down to the bottom, and find some land. Generally, a few of the animals die. Finally, one makes it, comes up, a few bits of mud in their claws, and then some God-like figure could take that little bit of mud, cast it on the water, and then create land from that again. Now, admittedly, there are some pretty crazy things, especially especially if these stories are to be taken on their own merit. But when you view them with the knowledge that the legends were passed down through many generations, likely by nothing more than a retelling by someone to someone, and the confusing of languages at the Tower of Babel, and how that would have limited each people group to only what they could remember about the actual flood account that they had learned of, think about it. They couldn't verify it with others, right? I mean, because you couldn't speak their languages. So these legends, although somewhat crazy, well, they start to make better sense when you kind of look at it that way. They almost all speak of the flood coming because of some sort of evil, either by specific people or by the population as a whole. Many of them speak of giants being in the earth prior to the flood. The warning of the flood generally comes to an old man, and despite him warning most or all of the people, well, they refuse to listen and take him seriously. And the list of the things that look very close to the Ark and Noah and global flood and the Bible story, that list goes on and on. So he also, in one of the many appendices, speaks of the Epic of Gilgamesh. No, not the Smurf guy, that's Gargamel, and no, not the stranded 3-hour tour little buddy guy, that's Gilligan. The Epic of Gilgamesh is an ancient flood legend who some try to claim is what the biblical account stole and turned it into their own thing, which is where we got Noah and the Ark. But he pretty well shoots that theory down, at least from a very logical standpoint. So the only issue I have with this book is that it's a bit much. He's compiled excellent material. He's organized it very well. The book is done correctly, but so many of the stories are so similar to the other stories, and honestly, things just kind of start to blur together. Spending 30 minutes reading the same things over and over gets a little rough. And as he mentioned a number of times, this was the first edition. He planned or plans on making subsequent editions with more legends added as he finds them. This book is a few years old. I'm not sure if he's done that yet or not. So would I recommend this book? Sort of. If you're not really interested in something like this, just a drubbing of information, a somewhat dry, very repetitive drubbing of information, then you probably don't want to buy this book. And this book will likely never be read by me in its entirety again. But for me, this will now go on the bookshelf as a reference for me. And that's really who this is for. Reading it one time through, that's more than enough. But if you're like me and like to have good reference materials kind of hanging around, well, this is a fantastic book to have. I have not seen a compilation like this anywhere else, although that's not saying there isn't something else out there. I just haven't seen one. And along with mentioning that he was going to update this with more findings in subsequent editions, he also mentioned that he was looking at compiling creation or Tower of Babel legends and possibly more flood legends from other countries and continents. And those would most likely be great books to have as well. And that's it. We're all caught up. Even with all that's going on with the holidays, vacation, traveling coming up, I think I can get one more book finished up. It's what I would call a normal-sized book, and so far it's been pretty interesting and somewhat of a fast read, so fingers crossed on that one. Okay, as always, links are in the notes for all of these books, and so with that, go read something. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.